We have to assume that around 3,000 years before the Common Era, Akkadian scholars inherited some of the pre-literate Sumerian musical tradition, which slowly infiltrated and added to whatever system they already had acquired, also in its pre-literate period. This osmotic phenomenon would have taken several centuries before achieving seamless reciprocal acculturation. Therefore, we may be forgiven further to assume that Akkadian theory as we know it, from written evidence, must carry with it some of the Sumerian theory, partially reflecting some of the orality of both cultures. This would have happened in the same manner as the Sumerian language, which did not die off with the emergence of the Akkadian culture, but subtly blended into Semitic linguistic layers, where some of its agglutinative nature conflated with Semitic morphology from the late 4th millennium under the form of early pictographs and iconographies. Thus, the nature of origins must be taken into consideration. What would be the origins of a musical system, and would we associate them as part of the semiology of the Sumerians and of the Akkadians for each societal group, as part of a set of symbols and icons having functions all running concurrently with linguistic semiotics? It is to be further assumed that both the original nature of Sumerian and Akkadian musicology came during their pre-literate phases with evidence of Sumerian semiology from the late 4th millennium under the form of early pictographs and iconography. The origins of a musical system for each societal group are part of a set of symbols and icons having functions all running concurrently to linguistic semiotics. Thus, we take it that the earliest developments of language, if not the language itself, are analogous to the development of music. Language is the silent theory of which the tongue is its musicality. The voice is the ultimate instrument. It is an integral part of the human body. It evolved simultaneously to its slow development, where vocal folds naturally produce conjoined speech sounds, the inseparable tool of expression. These inflections, which characterize our species, such as suspensive and conclusive expressions, added to a seminal pitch, as satellites to the treble or to the bass, with bilateral Sumerian, and to the treble, and to the bass with pre-Semitic and Semitic trilateral Akkadian. The nature of the gaps between these pitches would have naturally been determined by intervals, not too large and not too small, avoiding physical strains on the vocal folds, with excessive expansion or contraction exerting unwanted efforts against the nature of a neutral status, where the relaxation of the folds became the systemic tonal center, as will be revealed much later in the earliest texts of theory. Thus, from a Sumerian bilateral interval, a Semitic trilateral phoneme was created as the fundamental cell from which the earliest preliterate Semitic systems would have been established. Next, I shall attempt at providing the evidence and the proof of the evidence of what I have advanced so far. While most, if not all, scholars who have attempted at solving the music of the ancient Near East did so posteriostically, that is, trying to solve the music of the past, with theories written hundreds of years later, a practice which is unscientific, as is, for instance, translating Old English with a modern English grammar. However, the attempt at speculating that some of the music of the past may be comparable with some elements of contemporary ethnomusicological examples may be useful as long as samples are kept well segregated from one another, and do not pretend to any form of acculturation, and only stand as careful observational analogy. For example, the following song extract from the Arabian Gulf of women pulling fishing nets is the application of the trilateral isotonal system, with a nucleus of F-sharp around which gravitate two pitches, however, with some pitch variations, as seen on the next clip. and with a similar trilateral behavior, played of the Anbindi harp of the Cameroon, with a video of the musician, followed by the graphic analysis of the same fragment and a detailed snapshot. The nature of the intervals between the three pitches of trilateral segmental consonantal phonemes varies considerably in ethnomusicology, and would also have varied in the music of the ancient Near East. Equal temperament musicology has established three principal patterns. Firstly, the major third, where each interval is a tone, such as C, D, E, or E, D, C. Secondly, the minor third, where we find one tone and one semitone, such as D, E, F, or F, E, D. And thirdly, the diminished third, where the tonal center is surrounded by two semitones, such as B, C, C sharp, or C sharp, C, and B. It is very doubtful that the earliest forms of music in the ancient Near East would have observed and practiced any tonal precisions. However, we have evidence from the early 2nd millennium BCE that they would have known precise relative pitches, notably with texts U780, written around 1800 BCE, U3011, written during the 1st millennium BCE, and with the mathematical texts from the Temple Library of Nippur, written around 2300 BCE, that we shall explore later. Generative trilateral thirds appear in a cuneiform text dating from about 800 years BCE. This document is known as CBS 10996. It gives the names of 7 intervals of descending melodic thirds and their location by means of 2 numbers on a grid of 7 degrees. However, this tablet, which dates from the 1st millennium BCE, was the adaptation of an earlier larger tridecatonic system, or a system spanning 13 degrees, to a heptatonic system, or a system spanning on 7 degrees. The arrows and numbers in blue indicate the position of melodic intervals as given in text CBS 10996. Their irregularity is clear. The arrows and numbers in red indicate the location of the 7 melodic thirds as originally intended on a tridecatonic span or system of 13 degrees, and shows regularity in their location. To the right and in black are the names of the 7 generative melodic thirds in Akkadian. This is how these 7 melodic thirds would have sounded, although in relative pitch intonation, firstly in the original descending disposition in CBS 10996. It is clear that this arrangement does not make much musical sense, and now they are played in the descending tridecatonic arrangement. It is certain that in the earliest phases of musical development, This system of descending triconsonantal cells, or intervals, would not have been as they were during the second millennium BCE, and that the intervals around the nucleus or tonal center would have been far less precise. To illustrate this, I would propose the recording of a xylophone from the Cameroon with 11 blades. The instrument is a Mpimo xylophone, recorded by Gerhard Kubik in May 1970, and is part of the Arthur Morris Jones collection. A comparison between the tuning of trilateral pitches on the balafon and on the reconstructed sequence of thirds in CBS 10996 shows their divergence. The two systems vary in the quality of their intervals, but the systemic procedure is similar. The intervals given by the balafon are larger than those in the diatonic system in CBS 10996, because these former pitches satisfied the requirements of the Cameroonian musicians, while with the latter, diatonism best suited the ears of Mesopotamians. Through the process of natural anthropological evolution, intervals have a tendency to shrink, and thus the presence of large intervals in primitive trilateral systems, followed by anhemitonism, then by hemitonism, then by diatonism, leading to the microtonality of the most sophisticated Middle Eastern systems, which naturally ran conjointly to the development of the extraordinary refinements of classical Arabic and Farsi. It remains that regardless of the ethnomusicological Cameroonian tuning method, or the Mesopotamian diatonic tuning system of the second millennium, it is credible that both relied on tonal memory, a system by which groups, from wherever they may come, and from whatever period, have the ability to memorize melodic patterns which emerge spontaneously in tuning practices. These would vary from one group to the other, until committed to written theory, which was the case in Mesopotamia, since at least the middle of the third millennium. Trilateral thirds as extrapolated from text CBS 10996 agglutinate in order to generate melodic fifths. Then, the resulting 7 descending fifths agglutinate to create 7 descending enitonic scales, or scales made of 9 degrees. We know the names of the 7 descending fifths by extrapolation from the information in text CBS 10996. However, let us be reminded that this text was written in the middle of the first millennium BCE for a heptatonic span or system, and as a consequence, certain of the intervals were inverted and had to be replaced on a larger pentadecatonic grid. But first, here is the hand copy of the left column of the original text. We note that the text spreads on 28 lines. From lines 1 to 14, numbers are first mentioned and are followed by the names of the intervals, while from lines 15 to 28 the lines start by naming and numbering the strings which delineate the intervals. This is followed by the numbers locating the strings and ends with the names of the intervals. Thus, lines 15 to 28 are an expansion of lines 1 to 14. We shall now resume what we have established so far and play the different intervals and scales generated from the tridecatonic system, and first listen to the 7 descending melodic thirds: 1 Titor Ishotum, 2 Surdu, 3 Sheru, 4 Sholshotum, 5 Rebutum, 6 iscum, 7 titor coblitu. Then ascending melodic thirds conjoin in order to generate descending melodic fifths in this order. 1 titor ishatum plus iscum gives the descending fifth, nish to hrim. 2 surdu plus titor coblitu gives ishatum. 3 sheru plus titor ishatum gives imbubum. 4 sholshatum plus surdu gives need koblim. 5 rebutum plus sheru gives coblitum. 6 iscum plus sholshatum gives kitmum. 7 titor coblitum plus rebutum gives pitum. Note that the names of the intervals of ascending thirds are different from the names of the descending fifths, although 2/3 have the same names as 2/5, but these are preceded by the term titor, meaning bridge, such as titor ishotum and titor coblitu. The reason why is obscure. Now listen to these combinations. Then 2 descending fifths conjoin into descending enitonic scales. Note that the names of fifths and enitonic scales are the same. They differ in that intervals of fifths are preceded by the Sumerian logogram, so unlike the names of the 7 scales. Enitonic scales amount to a pentadecachordal hypersystem, with D as tonal center. The scale of Pitum stands right in the middle of the hypersystem. The interval of Coblitum, the dissonant interval, as it is a diminished fifth, sits at the center of the enichordal scale of Pitum. The naming of the scales rests on the location of the dissonant interval in each hendecachordal scale, or scale having 11 degrees, probably during the 3rd millennium BCE, for instance, in the scale of Ishatum, C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C, B, A, G, the diminished fifth is between F and B. This interval is Sa Cap Li Tum. It is this interval which gives the name for the next scale, the scale of Cap Li Tum, and so on. It is now appropriate to discuss the relationship between system and ambitus. Many have claimed that they were distinct entities and that any system can be hosted in any span. However, this is incorrect, as it would lead, in cases where systems are larger than spans, to incorrect inversion of intervals, which are the basis for tuning methods, because this would falsify the issuing scales. However, some preliterate as well as some ethnomusicological tuning methods relied on tonal memory rather than on interval appreciation, but these cannot be taken in consideration in this discussion, which mostly relies on written evidence. The series of 7 ascending melodic thirds amount to an anichord. The series of 7 descending fifths amount to a tridecachord, and the 7 descending enitonic scales amount to a pentadecachord. The next phase of this program about the music of the ancient Near East introduces the concept of the dynamic status versus the thetical status of a musical system. As we have said earlier, the 7 enneotonic scales cover an ambitus of 15 degrees, or a pentadecachord. When a musical instrument is fitted with 15 strings, tuned in a just diatonic intonation, this will allow the musician to play melodies in each of the 7 scales generated by a tuning system, each having its particular mood. These are the 7 scales in a dynamic disposition. The first scale is E sharp, falling from C. The second scale is Koblitum, falling from F. The third scale is Nish Tuhrim, falling from B. The fourth scale is Nid Koblim, falling from E. The fifth scale is Pitum, falling from pitch A. The sixth scale is Mbubum, falling from D. The seventh scale is Kitmum, falling from G. We note that in all these 7 scales given in the dynamic disposition, the Procrustean interval, or the unclear interval, is always placed between F and B in the following descending order: F, E, D, C, B. Furthermore, in order to keep the Procrustean intervals as fifths, the system must be decatonic as shown. Therefore, in order for a musician to execute pieces in the 7 different scales, an instrument fitted with 11 strings would have been required. This is precisely the number of strings that are seen on the silver lyre of Ur, dating from around 2600 years BCE, and therefore provides a good estimation of the time at which the hendecatonic system was in usage. And so, the musical systems of the ancient Near East evolved until the advent of thetical enneotonism, for which the earliest evidence dates from around 1800 BCE, with cuneiform text UET 774. This fragmentary tablet was unearthed by Leonard Woolley in the 1920s. It offers a remarkable tuning system, never yet equalled, for the generation of 7 enneotonic scales in the thetical disposition that we shall now explain. This document is an example of Babylonian scholarship geniality. Because of its structure, this fragmentary tablet could be easily reconstructed to its original condition. However, I shall not give all the details of this work, but only explain the method it encapsulates. The text consists in two parts, the second part being almost the mirror image of the first part. The axis of symmetry is indicated by the instruction, nusukum, which simply says that what was tuned up in the first part must now be untuned or tuned down. Each part of this prescriptive document is composed of 7 quatrains. In the first part, the first quatrain says that 1. If the lyre is tuned in the scale of Ishartum. 2. The unclear or Procrustean interval is Kolobletum. 3. Tune up string 5. And 4. The unclear interval will be clear. This means that the diminished fifth will be corrected to a just fifth. As a consequence, a new scale is generated. For this new scale, the text indicates the location of the unclear interval and instructs that one of the strings should be tuned up. These instructions continue up to the 7th quatrain. Then the instructions are reversed until the last quatrain of the second part, which equates to the first quatrain of the first part symmetrically. The method prescribed in this document makes it indubitable that the scales were descending, because the axis of symmetry indicates that the pitches that were tuned up must now be tuned down, and that as a consequence the scales must be descending. Now, the first scale in this text is Ishartum, which is the descending phetic enneatonic scale of C, C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C, B. It is also a descending phetic dynamic enneatonic scale. The second scale, resulting from the tuning up by an assumed unqualified semitone of F to F sharp, generates the descending phetic scale of Kobletum, or C, B, A, G, F sharp, E, D, C, B, which equates to the descending enneatonic dynamic mode of F, F, E, D, C, B, A, G, F, E. Both phetic and dynamic have the same order of intervals. Semitone, tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 and semitone. However, they are running in exact parallel motions, a fifth apart, C and F. Therefore, the dynamic is a transposition of the phetic, and reciprocally. The instructions in the text would have originally been given for a phetic hendecatonic descending system, while as they stand, they are given for a phetic enneatonic descending system, and as a consequence, 2 of the Procrustean or unclear intervals of the diminished fifth are inverted as augmented fourths, as illustrated, firstly for the enneachord, and followed by their original hendecachordal disposition. Enneatonic set with 2 inverted diminished fifths. Hendecatonic set with only diminished fifths or unclear intervals. Parts 1 and 2 of the original hendecatonic scale system are given here in both the phetic and dynamic dispositions. The invention of the phetic disposition would have brought up certain problems. Firstly, it would have been impossible for instruments tuned in both dispositions to play together, because the intervals between their dynamic and phetic scales would be dissonant. There would be one exception with Kableton, because the intervals between them would be the just fifths. This succession of just fifths would not be without reminding of the parallel organum of the Western Middle Ages, and although we might agree that the 7 Henny tonic scales might be at the origins of the ecclesiastical modes, it would be far-fetched to ascribe the parallel organum to Babylonian scholarship. However, I would be tempted to imagine, at some point in the complex evolution of music, that 2 musicians, one playing a harp dynamically tuned in the descending Henny tonic mode of F or Kabletum, and that a lyricist playing the same mode, but in the thetic Kabletum on a hendecachordal lyre, would have been astonished at the issuing heterophony, neither knowing what was heterophony. However, had this ever happened, it would probably have remained a unique accident. Who knows? It will be noted that text CBS 10996 and UET 774 were both adaptations of older systems to more recent ones. For instance, CBS 10996, written in the middle of the first millennium and transposed for a heptatonic system, would have initially been written in the middle of the third millennium for a tridecatonic system, and that UET 774, written at the dawn of the second millennium for an n-neotonic system, would have also been conceptualized during the middle of the third millennium for an hen-decatonic system. However, this fact has been ignored by most scholars having shown an interest in ancient Mesopotamian musicology and who happily, regardless of chronology, have placed these texts as if they all had been conceived in first millennium heptatonism. Another text, UET 7-126, with field number U3011, is Neo-Babylonian. It was also, and most certainly first developed at the dawn of the second millennium. It is better known as Nabni 232, but also with its Sumerian name Sig-Alan. It was the 32nd tablet of a well-known bilingual Sumerian Akkadian lexical series, ubiquitously used during a period of about 1,000 years, with variations in content. The Chicago Assyrian Dictionary defines Nabnitu as progeny, among other meanings, which is quite appropriate in relation to its contents in that, musically, it would have related to the principle of generation that we find much later in Greek musicology with the word yinos, having the same meaning, probably borrowed from Akkadian genu, meaning descendant, itself a Sumerian loanword. The cognitive process leading to the conceptualization of this text is the witness of an ethereal oral tradition, probably in the 4th millennium, which would have slowly developed into a written form in the middle of the 3rd millennium. The cognition process came from the observation of the horizontal yoke of the lyre, the observation of its 9 tuning pegs, and their relation to the 9 pitches to which the pegs would have tuned them. The lyricist would have explained to the scribe, as well as he could, the names of the pitches with some occasional explanatory adjectives. The original nomenclature would have been in Sumerian, and later scribes would have produced more or less equivalent equations in Akkadian. However, during the 1st millennium, it is contended that the Akkadian was the source language and that the Sumerian was a contemporary translation of the Akkadian. Thus, it is the horizontal yoke of the lyre which defined the linear aspect of early Sumerian Babylonian theory. Then, the scribe transcribed the horizontal linearity into a vertical nomenclature as shown on the text. Sadly, I cannot produce a photograph of the original text, which was sent back to Baghdad in 1973, and on numerous occasions, when I was at the Iraqi Museum, I could not locate the original tablet. The contents of the tablet are clear. There are 9 strings or pitches. It will be useful at that point to say that in antiquity, strings and their pitch values share the same name as the G string of a violin, which will always be tuned to a G, although it may produce many other pitches. The strings of the lyre in the present text are arranged in symmetry. They all start from the middle string, which is string 5. On each side, we have simplified the 1st string, the 2nd string, the 3rd string, the 4th string, and the 5th string. Then we have the 4th string of the behind, the 3rd string of the behind, the 2nd string of the behind, and the behind string. The tablet concludes by saying 9 strings. However, it is a bit more complicated, as the names of the strings have qualifications that I shall now produce. The Sumerian column for the 1st string has the following complements, which translate as either string D, 1st string, or rival string. The Akkadian column says prime, 1st or front string. The Sumerian column for the 2nd string has either adjacent string, 2nd or next string. The Akkadian column has adjacent or second string. The Sumerian column for the third string has third thin string, third or string 3 thin. The Akkadian has third thin. The Sumerian for the fourth string has string 4 small and fourth. The Akkadian has made by the god Iha. For the fifth string, the Sumerian has fifth, string D5 and fifth rival string. The Akkadian has fifth. For the fourth behind string, the Sumerian has string 4 rear, fourth string of the bigger back. The Akkadian has fourth of the rear. For the third behind string, the Sumerian has string 3 rear and third string of the bigger back. The Akkadian has third of the rear. For the second behind string, the Sumerian has string 2 rear and second string of the bigger back. Akkadian has second of the rear. For the first behind string, the Sumerian has string 1 rear and first string of the bigger back. The Akkadian has rear string. This text elucidates which strings are at the treble and which are at the bass. Text UET 74 taught us that the system was descending, while text CBS 10996 said that the sequence started with a pitch numbered 1. Now it remained to locate this pitch on the lyre. Would it be at the front of the boviform lyre or at its back? The answer is clear. The treble is located closest to the horns of the bull and the bass, closest to the bigger back of the bull. The structure of the text is best explained with a series of graphics. We begin with the axis of symmetry, which is string 5. From this string, 2/5 are projected, one to the treble and one to the bass. The central pitch will be D. The treble pitch will be He. And the bass pitch will be G. Then from the two opposite pitches, tune just fourths inward to E and C. Then from the axis D, tune 2 just fourth in opposite directions to G and He. This series of tunings generates an anhemitonic or pentatonic tuning. This anhemitonic pentatonic tuning is very significant, as it is similar to the system used in early Oriental Christianity, as formulated by the Benedictine monk John Clare. This would suggest that from its sources in the mid-3rd millennium, anhemitonic pentatonism was still in usage during the first centuries of the Common Era by early Christians, and then used in the West, as evidenced by early plain chant. Note that the tuning in fifths and fourths are carried out for each fifth independently of the other. First the treble fifth and then the bass fifth. Both fifths are conjoined by the tonal axis D. The void between the second and the third degrees on both fifths, starting from their highest and lowest pitches, amount to a triamitone, presenting a dilemma because this void could only be filled with a semitone, either F sharp or natural F, for the treble fifths, or either B flat or natural B for the bass fifth. This explained the reason why, in the pitch nomenclature in our text, only the third string of the treble fifth is movable to F sharp or natural F, and is thus called the third thin string, while the third string in the bass remains fixed as a natural B, since there are no lexical terms indicating that the fifth string at the bass should be altered. Both third pitches at the treble and at the bass required that fourths crossed over the boundary of the axis in order to place semitones in both fifths, F or F sharp at the treble and B at the bass. This text provides the most accurate description of the generative enitonic scale, which is symmetrical with the exception of the third thin string mobility. It places at its core the axis of symmetry, the fundamental triradical third, the Procrustean fifth, the heptatonic scale, the enitonic scale, and the possible extension to larger hendicatonic, tridecatonic, and pentadecatonic systems. There is absolutely no written evidence that this text consisted in two conjoined intervals of just fifths, and that other degrees were generated by means of just fourths, which, it must be reminded, are inversions of just fifths. However, we need to start with something. And then I would ask, why would these fifths and fourth be anything else than just? However, the application of this assumption in relation to other texts, such as UET 774, and others could not have generated any scales similar to our own Western models, should fifths and fourth had been any other than just. Therefore, it is possible to calculate the exact pitches intended from the cognitive process of its design. Thus I have also, and arbitrarily, chosen the pitch of D as the tonal axis of the system. This choice was not made with any intention of ascribing the system with an absolute, but with a relative pitch, where D is the axis of symmetry, our own Western system, which itself came from the Western Orient. The frequency ratio for the interval of the just fifth is 3/2. The value is 702 cents. Two intervals of fifths amount the frequency ratio of 9/4. The value is 1,404 cents. The frequency ratio of the fourth is 4/3. The value is 498 cents. If we take it that the third thin string pitch is natural F, then the scale is composed of just tones of 204 cents and of semitones of 90 cents. Thus, the series consists of tone, tone, semitone, tone, tone, semitone, tone, and tone, or a natural intonation scale. There are other tablets having theoretical content. However, I believe that I have said the essential about ancient Middle and Near Eastern archaeomusicology. I have explained the structural nature of the system, its construction, and its quantification. We shall conclude this video with a Hurrian song H6, which I have reconstructed from the basis of the theory discussed here. The intonation has been orientalized with the guidance of two friends and colleagues from the Lebanon, Rosie Bayem and the late Amin Bayem.
Ulali huli, aluli hulali huli, wala wala, khanutani ashazi huwa, shinute zuturi. Ubugara kudunita sharkina zili shipri humaru khatuari wadnita hukuri kur kur kurta inshallah ulali kabgi halugi shirit muru heshal tati bishia unuga ulali uli ulali hula ulali uli ulali hula ulali uli ulali uli aluli ulali uli wala wala kapshili umoga hakali shamshame tulil ukukal tununita Hanuka kalitanil nikala nikhurashal khana khanuti ataya asha